Nottinghamshire Archives Phonobites series and part 2 of 3 Women and a Workhouse Scandal. One of the delights of Nottinghamshire Archives is their collection of poor law records, which includes the minutes of the meetings of the Board of Guardians for the Southwell Poor Law Union. It was in these ledgers that I first came across this scandal. At their meeting on the 22nd of May 1838, the Guardians resolved to write to their governing body, the Poor Law Commission in London, about certain irregularities on the part of the governor of the workhouse, which they do not think it right to pass over without notice. In part 1, I talked about the first of these irregularities, when the workhouse governor or master had gone against the Guardian's explicit instructions and shackled a woman of weak intellect with a truancy clog to prevent her from absconding. Now I'm going to talk about the second allegation made against the governor, John Fogg, and try to uncover the name and story of the second woman involved, the single mother. The Guardians reported that a woman, deserted by her husband, has been in the workhouse ever since the formation of this union and for some time previous, with 2 children, one whose legitimacy is not doubted, and another born in the workhouse long since the desertion of her husband. The woman has been a great deal employed in the kitchen of the workhouse by the governor, and has been indulged much more than the other paupers. This woman appears now to be again pregnant, and there is no reason to believe that she has had any connection with her husband, and was suffered by the governor to go away with her youngest child on the 14th of May, leaving the eldest child, now 6 years old, in the house. On the day of her going away, the governor was absent for the day, which he accounts for by saying that he was at Newark Fair, that he has always taken such occasional absences without considering it necessary to ask the leave of the board. Suspicious rumours having got abroad as to the paternity of the child of which the woman is now pregnant, some inquiries have been made about it. The governor states that the woman was absent on the Wednesday after last Martinmas, by his leave, to go to Newark Fair, when there obtained the permission of his wife, who was also at the fair, to stay away all night, and he insinuates that she then became pregnant by the man who is said to be the father of the child of which she was delivered in the workhouse. John Fogg is accused of abusing another of the paupers in his care. Again, the woman is unnamed, possibly to protect her, but with the result that we never hear her voice. I want to identify her and learn something of her life, to see if this provides a different slant on the story from the accounts given by John Fogg and the men acting as the guardians for the Southwell Poor Law Union. The Guardian's report contains several clues which might help us to trace the woman concerned. We know she came into the workhouse before 1836. The workhouse was built in 1824 and operated as the Thurgerton 100 Incorporated Workhouse until it was adopted as the Workhouse for the Southwell Poor Law Union in 1836. Nottinghamshire Archives hold 2 journals kept by the Workhouse Master that date back to 1824, so they should contain a record of this woman. We know that she was married, but that her husband had deserted her, and that she had 2 children, the oldest around 6 years of age. Both children were also inmates of the workhouse. The older was the child of her husband, but the younger child's paternity was in doubt. The younger child was born in the workhouse long since the desertion of her husband, so there may be a record of his baptism in the Upton Church registers. Finally, the woman was absent on the Wednesday after Martinmas in 1837, when she is supposed to have conceived her child. Martinmas falls on the 11th of November, a Saturday in 1837, so she was absent on Wednesday 15th of November. If she conceived her child at this time, she would be due to give birth in August 1838. There is only one woman whose circumstances match all 6 of these facts, Elizabeth Barnsdale, and this is her story. Elizabeth was the daughter of Joseph and Jane Wright. She was baptised at Winthorpe, near Newark, on 16th of March 1806. Her father was a carpenter and wheelwright, and Elizabeth was one of 7 children, although sadly 3 of her siblings died young. Elizabeth's mother also died when she was 18, and her father remarried shortly afterwards. Elizabeth's stepmother, Sarah Hancock, was 48 when she married Joseph Wright. There's no evidence to suggest she had any children of her own, and no evidence to suggest she did not enjoy a good relationship with her stepchildren. Only Elizabeth's sisters, Mary and Anne, were young enough to have been dependent on Joseph and his second wife. Elizabeth and her brother Thomas were old enough to be working, and at least in Elizabeth's case, probably living elsewhere, as she would have gone into service. On 27th of March 1826, Elizabeth married William Barnsdale, a labourer from Sutton-on-Trent. They were married at St Giles Church in the village of Cromwell, probably where Elizabeth was working, and Elizabeth's brother, Thomas, was one of the witnesses. Elizabeth was pregnant, and 4 months later the couple baptised their daughter Jane on 15th of July at All Saints' Church in Sutton-on-Trent. The couple remained in Sutton-on-Trent for a few years. They baptised a second daughter, Anne, in August 1828. Then they returned to the neighbouring village of Cromwell, where their son Edward was baptised on 19th of July 1830. Over the next few years, life became increasingly difficult for Elizabeth. In March 1833, her daughter Anne died at the tender age of 4 and was buried at Cromwell. It's also around this time that her husband William deserted her. There's no record of how Elizabeth managed to support herself and her 2 children. Possibly she found refuge with her father and stepmother. I next find Elizabeth recorded in the Workhouse journal kept by the master John Fogg in 1835. She's listed as one of the inmates, chargeable to the parish of Cromwell, and described as with child, bastard. There's no reference to her 2 children, Jane and Edward. The pregnant Elizabeth, a farmer's servant, had entered the workhouse alone. There's no information about the father of her child. Elizabeth's son Richard was born in the workhouse in August 1835. Elizabeth remained in the workhouse for a year, until September 1836, when she left, taking Richard with her. There is a record in the minutes of the Guardians' meetings, dated 30th of August 1836, noting the board approves of Elizabeth Barnsdale having clothing given to her and her child as she is leaving to go to work. The amount spent was 17 shillings and 4pence, but there is no record of where she went or who she was going to work for. Her new situation didn't work out. The master's journal records that Elizabeth was back in the workhouse in 1837, this time with both her sons, Edward and Richard. but there's still no mention of her daughter Jane. The note beside Edward's name reads, "Father ran away." Elizabeth is noted to be pregnant. There is no record of the birth or baptism of a baby, so it seems Elizabeth suffered a miscarriage, or the baby was stillborn. By November 1837, Elizabeth is trapped within a cycle of pregnancy and poverty. She's also a victim of the new law's attempts to improve the bastardy law. Before 1836, the law sought to reduce the cost of supporting single mothers and their children by penalising the fathers. The new Poor Law reversed this policy and made the woman solely responsible for herself and her children, effectively allowing the father to escape any punitive consequences. So, whether a woman was struggling to bring up a family alone because she was unmarried, or because she'd been abandoned by her husband, she was deemed to be an able-bodied pauper, and therefore the only help offered to her would be the workhouse. John Fogg claimed that Elizabeth asked for, and was given, permission to leave the workhouse on the 15th of November 1837 to go to Newark Fair. Fogg told the Board of Guardians his wife, the matron, was also at the fair, and she gave Elizabeth permission to stay out all night. This was, according to John Fogg, the night she conceived another child, and he believed she had gone to visit the father of her younger son, Richard. We only have John Fogg's word for this. The records of admissions and discharges for the Southwell Workhouse have not survived, and his account cannot be checked. But it does fit the pattern of behaviour that's been revealed for Elizabeth Barnsdale. After the desertion of her husband, she had entered into a relationship with a man who was clearly unable or unwilling to support her, forcing her to seek refuge in the workhouse when pregnant on 2 previous occasions. Rumours suggested it was not this man who was responsible for Elizabeth's latest pregnancy, however, but the master of the workhouse, John Fogg. The commissioner who investigated the affair, Edward Goulson, certainly believed John Fogg was the father, but he was unable to prove it. His investigation was hampered by highly suspicious behaviour on Fogg's part. The day before Goulson was due to attend a meeting of the guardians at the workhouse, John Fogg allowed Elizabeth, now 6 months pregnant, to leave the workhouse. She took Richard with her, but left Edward behind. She does not appear to have returned until after John Fogg's resignation, when she also seems to have brought her daughter Jane back with her. In due course, Elizabeth gave birth to another son in the workhouse on 30th of August 1838. Like his brother, Richard, his baptism is recorded in the registers of the church at Upton. There is no information about his father. 5 days later, he died and was buried at St Giles Church in Cromwell on 3rd of September 1838. The minutes of the Guardians' meeting on 9th of October record that they spent 10 shillings and 9pence on his funeral expenses. His name was Jonathan. And that is the last record I have found of Elizabeth Barnsdale. Did she also die in the workhouse? Perhaps I'll be able to find out more when the coronavirus restrictions have been lifted and Nottinghamshire Archives can allow access to parish records again. Elizabeth's experience closely resembles that of Sarah Mountney, the woman of weak intellect from Part 1 who was also mistreated by John Fogg. Both women were abandoned by their husbands, and both paid the price, having to enter the workhouse with their children. Knowing a little bit more about Elizabeth does raise some questions about her relationship with John Fogg, and also about Mrs. Fogg. What was her role in this affair? She is the third unnamed woman in this scandal, and I'll be exploring her story in Part 3, The Master's Wife. If you would like to learn more about the Friends of Nottinghamshire Archives, you can visit our website and follow us on Facebook.